Welcome back, everyone. In this week's video, I'm going to be giving you folks your first homework assignment. We are going to make 2 cylinders. In part 1 of this 2-part series, we're going to make a cylinder that's 5 inches tall by 5 inches wide. In part 2, we are going to make the second cylinder, which will be 6 inches tall by 4 inches wide. We're going to prep 3 pounds of clay to make each cylinder, so stick around to see if I can hit these sizes or make it even taller. To continue the cylinder training, we want to practice throwing straight and even cylinders with set dimensions. This assignment is what I have my high school students work on for a month. They usually hate it and they get super frustrated, and some are unable to even hit these sizes. But after a month is over, they begin to throw other forms, and then they realize that all the training they did finally paid off, and then they can center faster, throw larger, and throw taller pieces. So prepare to be frustrated, but trust the process and it will pay dividends. I have timestamped the video, so don't be afraid to skip around to the sections that is the most interesting to you. Just make sure you watch my closing thoughts at the end of the video to help you understand how to use this training and to continue improving your cylinders with both more and less clay. So let's go ahead and get started with the 5x5. We're going to go ahead and begin with the 5x5 first, and I set the camera a little off so that you can see my pull hands a little better. And it's a little noisy outside, people are cutting grass, so I apologize if you hear a little more background noise than normal. So let's go ahead and get this centered. So round and get it stuck. And then you can do something called slap centering, and that actually helps the clay get a little more stuck to the bat, and you can tap it to center to remove any offness first before you actually start blending the edge. And right there, slightly off, but it's pretty close. And let's go ahead and start blending and centering. Blend the edge at the bottom. First step we always do is push it down. Always get that cone back at the top, because if not, you'll get a divot when you cone up. And let's cone up and down. Okay. When the skirt forms, get rid of it when you can. I have a little container here to put all my little goodies that I collect off the wheel. Going down. So engaging with my pinky on my right hand, pushing diagonally forward with my right. And I want to compress this to get that 5-inch width first. So you may want a ruler handy. From my hand, I know from here, from the tip of my finger to the base of my webbing here is 5 inches. So that's pretty close. So I'll leave it here. And I can go ahead and start digging my well. So thumbs on the top, arms anchored to the splash pad on your leg, and apply downwards pressure. And then, like I said in my last post, my back got tweaked, so I'm actually gonna throw with my hands a little upright because I don't want to bend over too much. And when possible, I like to try to use as much of the slip that comes off the clay so I don't get the clay overly wet. And that way, the clay doesn't get too soft. And the depth that we're aiming for, because we are training and practicing to throw taller, wider cylinders, we want about 1/4 inch. And that way we maximize the amount of clay we can get pulled vertically up. Okay, right there looks like 1/4 inch. And if you want to check the depth, you can always stab it with the needle and check that way, but that looks good. And now I'm going to introduce another way to open and to pull up. And you may have seen this in some other videos that I've made, but this is the way that I usually throw. Big or small, this is what I prefer. So instead of, like in my main tutorial videos, have your thumbs inside, fingers outside at midnight, and you move your thumbs to your pointer fingers like that, I actually use my left hand and I brace it here between 6 and 4, and I'm actually squeezing the clay like this to then open it. And as soon as it opens, I'm actually pulling my hand up to do a pull. So it's an open and pull at the same time. And then my right hand with the sponge more or less braces against my thumb on my left. So they move together like this. And then a pull. So my right hand basically does the same thing where I push in and I pull up. The sponge is just there to help lubricate the clay. So when I take a cross cut, this is kind of what it looks like. I put my hand inside, and then my pointer finger and my thumb for my left hand squeeze at the same height. My right hand with the sponge pushes in at below it. So that creates the offset like we talked about in the last cylinder video. So these hands, the sponge hand and then my outer thumb, move together as a unit. So this both squeezes at the base and higher up. My pointer finger squeezes as well, and then both hands start rising. Release the pressure as you rise, and we get to the rim, leave it there for a few seconds and release. So I prefer this method to open and pull because it takes two techniques and two steps and puts it into one. And so as you get comfortable, this is something that you may want to try. Okay, so add water, get my hands ready. And then if these fingers can't fit inside, they kind of just stay on the outside and they're elevated. Thumb over here, it's a little off center, you can see that bump and move, but when I push in, it will center itself with the sponge. So the sponge squeezes here, thumb over here. So actually I'm going to sit a little more so the camera angle can see. Squeeze and compress, and my whole hand here is actually compressing against the clay because I can't really get a fingertip. And that's fine for the opening because you want more surface area as you open. The moment I open wide enough, then I kind of release this pressure here and I just use fingertips. Okay, so let's break it down. So push and open. From the overhead cam, you can see the clay opening. You can see this really big undercut forming. Once I get the width that I want, I then start the pull. And now I'm focusing the pressure more on my fingertips versus the side of my finger here. And it's okay if you use the side to compress, but you just got to make sure not to push too hard. And when I go all the way up, I'm going to stop a little shy because I want to do that one more time for another pull. I keep my fingers up at the rim for a few seconds and I release. Okay, and the cool thing about this technique is you can keep doing it until your hands can't reach the bottom anymore. And so from the overhead cam, you can see that my floor is not completely flat. And to ensure that you get a nice even cylinder, you always want to flatten that out a little more. So with my left hand on the inside, I'm moving the clay outwards towards the clay wall at 4 o'clock, so right here where the pointer finger is. And then I can kind of lift up my left finger like a pull, and I'm blending that clay up into the clay wall because eventually it will rip off. So if I blend more, it won't rip off as much. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that new pull one more time. So remember, to do it, you're basically squeezing the clay. Normally this side of the finger is also applying pressure, but your thumb is only applying on the outside with one point. And then your outside hand with your right hand engages underneath your thumb. Squeeze, pinch, compress, lift up, slowly release the pressure, get to the top, stay there for a few seconds, and release away. Okay, so here we go. This time I'm kind of tilting this forward because my thumb is too short, my hand's too small to reach the bottom, but I can still compress the inside. So I'm going to open the clay wall, so setting that inside corner is creating a little bump here. And now I can start engaging and squeezing, but because this thumb is too short to reach the bottom, that's where the sponge comes into play. And I push, squeeze, and compress, and now I do my pull. And this pull is basically the same as our normal pulls. The only difference is my thumb here is on the outside to help support. And as I go up, I'm releasing the pressure, and then I slowly get to the top, little to no pressure at all, and I release. So with 2 pulls at 3 pounds, I was able to get this to basically 5 inches already. Now it is much wider than it needs to be, so now we're going to go ahead and do the collaring like we have shown in the previous videos. And for the collaring, if you watched it in my other videos, link is over here if you want to see it. There are a few ways to collar, and for something that's this wide at the rim, normally I like collaring with my hands at C's. So I just put my hands underneath, and my thumbs are actually pointed up this time, and I'm squeezing and just pulling my hands upwards, nice and slow. And so medium speed. The moment you feel the clay get sticky, release the pressure, add some water, slow my wheel down a little bit, and repeat. And this time my middle fingers are engaged as well, and my pointer fingers. So when I get to the rim, I leave it there for a few seconds and I release. So with those 2 pulls, setting up my cylinder initially, I was able to get to more or less that 5 wide by 5 tall. If you look at my inside corner is not fully set here, and my bottom's not completely flat. But with 3 pounds, you can definitely hit the 5 by 5. But just for fun, I'm going to do another pull because my top is a little thick. So let's see how tall I can actually make this thing. So this time I'm going to compress the bottom a little more, and I can use my sponge for that. And it's always best to compress the bottom and clean it up and set your inside edge before you get it too tall, because it's always a little more difficult doing this. But basically I'm using my sponge and using that as lubrication as I push outwards, because I want the clay to not stick to my hands. And so I'm setting my inside corner first. And just by doing that, you can see this bump form, and that's fine, because I actually want that there. And now my inside corner is set, and my floor is completely flat. So for my next pull, I'm actually going to pull and try to see how tall I can make it. Before I start it though, I want my rim to be a little narrower, because oftentimes when I pull, and when most people pull, they tend to pull it wide and out, and that's because the inside hand's applying too much pressure. So to help fix that, you can collar this in a little bit to help prevent it from getting too wide. And I know that my outside here is already wider than 5 inches, so I'm going to go ahead and really pinch this in and do a pull. And if you're unsure if this is wider than 5, you can get something called calipers and then measure. So I got my ruler and I got my calipers. I'm just going to open them up and measure the widest point. And then I'm going to take the measurement here. So putting it on the ruler is kind of faded, but I can tell this is 5.5, so a little wider. So I can squeeze it in about 1/4 inch on each side to get it narrower, and that way I'll be able to get it taller. And remember, the goal is a 5 by 5 for this first round. So add a little water, get it wet. I already pushed it out from the inside to set my inside corner. Now I'm going to push in with the outside, and just like we do the regular pulls, remember we push out, push in, and then pull up. And if you'd like a more detailed video, the link is in the description below for the cylinder tips and tricks. So we push out, push in, and now we do the pull. And before I do the pull, I'm doing that little tip where I compress the bottom a little more with my inside left hand, and then I'm going to do the pull. And then because the bottom was a little thinner, I'm actually going to start releasing the pressure here. And the way this was thrown, my top was a little thicker, so I can actually increase the pressure here. So as you throw, you can get used to how thick your clay is in different spots, and then change your pressure based on the thickness of your wall. Okay, so there we go. I more or less got my 5 by 5, but just to double check, I'm going to actually do it this way to check. So that's the width. That's 5 exact, so that's perfect. I have my wall almost straight, but I could still keep pulling this. So the reason why we started with 3 pounds is so that you have more clay to work with as you pull up. Because sometimes when you throw a little lighter, you keep pulling and pulling and pulling, but you only get it so high because you're not used to throwing thin walls. So that's why we want it a little heavier, so we can practice the pulls. And once you get used to this and you can pull this taller than 5 by 5, then you can decrease the weight by 1/4 pound or then 1/2 pound. And you can ultimately get your final size with less weight, and then you're ready to step up the weight and throw bigger and taller. So this is training. And so from my experience, 2 pounds is probably the amount of clay that I can pull up and get it to the dimensions. Any thinner than that, any lighter than that, it just gets a little more difficult, but it is possible if you keep your walls at 1/4 inch. All right, so I'm gonna do one more pull. Let's see how tall I can get this thing. So I push out, push in, really compress the bottom this time because I want it a little narrower, and then I do my pull. So I'm aiming for that 1/4 inch thickness, and that is the goal whenever you throw these cylinders, is 1/4 inch, at least for training purposes. And when you start throwing bigger and taller pieces, 1/4 inch is a good goal to aim for. Okay, leave it there for a few seconds and release. All right, starting to get a little wider, so let's do some collaring. This time I'm going to do a different collaring, which is just 2 C's with your hands and push forward, and then slide your hands up. So this is, you're able to collar the whole clay wall a little easier, but you just got to make sure your pressure is not too abrasive. All right, so right here bowed out because that clay is a little softer. I still got my 5 inch wide. This opened up a little bit, so I'm going to focus the collaring right here. So going back to that more traditional collaring. And I want to check for clay thickness. Before I do that, I want to do something called a centering pull. And so the center pull, I just basically have my left hand here. I push out with my finger, and then my right hand is just there to then kind of push in the clay where it gets wide, and I slowly lift my hand up. Not really compressing to pull, but just to kind of even it out. So just to kind of show you how that works, if you have areas of your clay that's a little wider than what you want, like that, my hand will compress the clay and then lift up. So very light pressure with both hands, and I'm pushing more with my right hand in that spot to get that clay wall more or less straight, and I slowly work my way all the way up. And this is good because it teaches you how to feel for clay thickness, and it really stabilizes your hand pulls so that you can more or less straighten your clay wall really evenly without having to use additional tools. So once again, that's a centering pull. Push and then compress and then bring both hands up very slowly like an elevator. Okay, to check for wall thickness, remember like in the last videos, you take your needle, stab your clay wall exactly where you want to check for thickness, feel the tip of the needle on the inside clay wall, pinch the needle where it touches the clay, and pull it out. So with my clay thickness, it's a little more than 1/4 inch, and that's totally fine. I could do a few more pulls, and for extra practice, I want to see how tall I can make this. So let's do one more pull and see if it ends up falling apart, or if I can get it a little taller, maybe off the camera. Let's see if we can do that as the goal. So once again, push in, push out, push down and compress with my inside hand, and then I pull. And now, because the clay is getting a little thinner, a little weaker, a little taller, I have to be very careful with the pressure that I apply, because it can start twisting on me as I get taller. Okay, and when I can, I get my left thumb and put it out to brace against my right hand. Okay, leave it there for a few seconds and release. I think I can do one more pull. The clay wall is definitely getting thinner. It's about 1/4 inch now. On the bottom, we have a nice inside corner still. So let's get a little wider. So to add water, what I like doing is I just put it on the rim and I squeeze. And usually that gets on the inside and outside. You can see some drops going beyond that. Or I cup my hand on the outside clay wall and I squeeze and I just bring it down. And that helps get the outside wet. All right, let's get one more pull, and then we'll see how tall we can finally get it. So push out, push in, and then pull. Okay, I'm using the splash pan as support, and then now I'm releasing the pressure slightly, but still rising, getting my left thumb outwards to support, and then lighter pressure at the rim. Leave it there for a few seconds and release. Okay, got a little wider. Let's do a collar. And then we'll clean it up and make it nice and straight. Okay, so basically to straighten out the clay wall, you could just take a ruler or straight edge, and then you're just standing it up. Ideally, you don't want it this long, but you just stand it up and then just brace against the wall. Just like we do the centering pulls, you're just lightly pushing the clay to touch the rib, and you slide your hands up. And then it's actually going to collect a lot of the clay on the inside, and most of it's slip, but that way you can really clean up your clay wall without really having to use a rib. So this is a ruler, and it really helps when you want to make straight cylinders. Okay, and then to clean up the bottom, if you have your throwing rib, you can just use two hands to help brace and then just slide it downwards, and that will cut away all that excess clay at the bottom that you don't really need. And I find that pretty easy to do compared to the wooden knife. Okay, and then just slide this needle underneath that ring and then peel it away. Okay, and then once again, clean it up. And I think that's a pretty good cylinder. So let's go ahead and measure, see what we got. So we have it's slightly smaller than 5. It's 4 3/4. And then the height is a little under 7 inches tall. So with 3 pounds, you can get it about 2 inches taller than the aimed height, which is a 5x5. And the cool thing about this training is once you throw your shape, if you don't want to cut it in half to examine your wall, you can shape this into whatever you want. And a 5x5, or in this case a 5x7, makes a really good orb vase. But when you start, your goal is to hit the height and then potentially go above it. So here's that 5-inch wide cylinder that's a little taller. It's closer to 6.5 inches and with 3 pounds. So the reason why we wanted to do it with 3 pounds is because this allows you to have a little more wiggle room to pull the walls taller without being too frustrated that you can't get it up here. Because the number one thing when students are starting to learn how to throw taller is the clay gets a little too thin and then it breaks. So with the extra clay, it gives you a little more wiggle room to get the height. And so that you can see the height difference, this is the goal, the 5x5, and this is the end result, 5x6.5. Now I probably could have threw it even taller because you can see that my clay walls are a little thicker than 1/4 inch at the bottom and it thins out to 1/4 inch at the top. So at 3 pounds, you could probably get this closer to 7 inches tall. So how can you use this training to improve? If you hit your size, your 5x5 with the 3 pounds, then you could do 2 things. Number one is you can decrease the weight, so you can go to 2.5 pounds and see if you can still hit the 5x5. If you hit it, then you can go and reduce it to 2 pounds and see if you can hit the 5x5. And I think anything under 2 gets kind of difficult to hit this dimension. So then once you get to that point, then you could do option number 2, which is keep throwing the 3 pounds, but throw it taller. And every time you throw, try to throw it taller and taller and taller. So I think that if you throw this with a thin base and a 1/4 inch wall, you could probably go slightly over 7. So every time you throw, if you decrease the weight, try to hit the 5x5. If you keep the weight the same, try to increase the height every time you throw. And my recommendation is when you throw the form, log the height, log the width, and write it down so you have some sort of notes to compare your next piece to. And then you can either cut it in half to see how your walls look, or if you want to save it, you can shape it into whatever you want, whether that's a vase, whether that's a bowl, and that way you get to at least keep the things that you're working on as you're training. So in the next video, for part 2, we are going to move on to the 6 tall by 4 wide, and we're going to see how we can get that going and the difference in size compared to this 5 wide cylinder. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you like this kind of content, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps to grow this little channel into something a little bigger. And as always, thank you for watching.